The sun bled out over the Badlands as they left her there, a crumpled figure beneath the gnarled branches of a dying oak. The veil she wore was torn, tangled around her wrist like a shackle. Dust and blood clung to the hem of her dress. Somewhere, behind her, laughter echoed, low, drunken, cruel. She didn't cry anymore. There wasn't enough left inside her to cry. In the distance, a single rider broke away from the line of hills, a silhouette against the fire of the sunset. He didn't shout, he didn't wave. He just rode straight for her, a quiet storm gathering in his chest. She didn't know yet if he had come to save her or bury her. Subscribe now, because tomorrow's story will haunt you even deeper. You'll need it. But before that, let me take you to the day it all began. The town of Dry Creek wasn't much more than a crooked line of buildings shoved against the endless red dust. A church with peeling white paint, a saloon with a door that never quite swung shut, 2 stores, 3 houses, and a jail that hadn't seen a sheriff sober enough to use it in years. The wind spoke louder than the people here. It rattled the tin roofs, hissed through the dead grasses, dragged its fingers down the battered planks of the porches. Folks in Dry Creek didn't waste breath on things that didn't matter, and in their eyes, Clara May didn't matter at all. She walked, with a limp that no one ever asked about. Some said a horse threw her when she was a child. Others said it was worse, that her own daddy once beat her so bad her hip never healed right. Nobody knew the truth. Nobody cared enough to find out. They just watched her out of the corners of their eyes like she carried a sickness that might catch. At 16, Clara May had been a pretty thing, hair like wheat and skin that burned fast in the sun. But by 18, life had hardened her, left a tightness around her mouth, a wariness in her stare. Her beauty had become something uncomfortable, something that whispered of hurt. She wore dresses a little too big, boots a little too worn. Her hands were always busy, scrubbing, sweeping, sewing, anything to avoid standing still long enough for the town to stare. The whispering started when her mother died. Fever, they said, but in truth it was more loneliness than sickness that killed her. After that, Clara May had no shield left, only her father, and he wasn't the sort to offer protection. He was the sort who sat in the saloon squinting through whiskey haze at the men with full pockets and empty beds and saw opportunity. They called her Poor Thing when she passed. Broken girl. Some were kinder about it, muttering a prayer, under their breath. Most just shook their heads, tightening their circles to keep her out. Girls her age crossed the street when they saw her coming. Boys pretended not to notice her at all. In a place like Dry Creek, your worth was measured by the shine of your future. A good marriage, a strong farm, healthy sons. Clara May had none of that to offer. She didn't speak much. Not after the fall that took her hearing in one ear and most of the strength in her leg. Her voice came out flat and uncertain now, like a bird trying to sing with a broken wing. Better to keep it to herself. Safer, too. Sometimes she would sit at the edge of the dry riverbed and watch the sun bake the world into silence. She would wonder what it would be like to live somewhere green, somewhere where the wind smelled of rain and the ground gave way to soft, rich mud. But those were foolish dreams, and Clara May knew better than to feed them. Dreams made the emptiness inside her ache even worse when she woke up. Every so often, a stranger would ride into town, trailing the promise of something different behind him like dust off his boots. And every time, Clara May would turn her face away, feeling the pull of hope and the sharper sting of its impossibility. Because nobody came to Dry Creek to save anyone. They came to forget, to lose themselves, to bury what was already dead. Her father said as much one night, slamming his hand down on the warped table and sloshing his drink across the wood. You ain't good for nothing but taking up air, girl. Best you find a way to earn your keep. Ain't no man gonna take on a broken thing like you unless he's got a reason. She cleaned up the spill, saying nothing, feeling the truth of it sink its claws deeper into her ribs. The reason came the next week, heavy and sweating atop a mare too tired to complain. Mr. Randall Cole, a man with a ranch 5 valleys over, a man with more cattle than teeth, a man whose last wife was buried in shallow ground after a fall, nobody asked too many questions about. The deal was struck over whiskey and handshake. Clara May was worth 3 steers and a promise not to bring her back. She found out 2 days before she was to be carted off like a side of beef. Her father didn't explain. He just left the dress on the end of her bed. White, stiff with starch. Wrong. The only warning he gave was a muttered, "Best not make a fuss. You ain't got nowhere else to go." And Clara May, foolish, desperate, cracked but not yet broken Clara May, still sat by the dry riverbed that night and whispered to the sky. "If there's anyone out there listening," she said, her voice ragged, "I ain't asking for a prince. Just not this." But the stars didn't blink, the wind didn't answer, and the town of Dry Creek slept easy, knowing tomorrow would be just another day when nothing changed. If this is breaking your heart already, you haven't seen the worst yet. Tap subscribe. I've got another truth waiting for you tomorrow. Because tomorrow, the day Clara May stood in front of the broken oak tree, a wedding veil twisted in her fist, would come faster than anyone dared to believe. The day the stranger rode into Dry Creek, the wind changed. It carried more than just dust and grit that afternoon. It carried the heavy weight of something about to break. The sky was too still. The crows, usually rowdy and sharp, sat silent on the fences, black eyes tracking the road. Clara May felt it before she saw it. A prickle at the back of her neck, a shifting in the heat. She was sweeping the front steps of the general store, the wooden slats creaking under her slow, uneven steps. Same as every day, same as every breath she forced out. And then she looked up. He wasn't much to look at. Not the way the town measured men. His coat was dust-beaten, his boots rough and travel-worn. His hat shaded most of his face, but when he rode past, she caught a glimpse of his mouth. A hard line, but not cruel. And his eyes, when they flicked to hers, didn't linger where most men's did. They didn't linger at all. They saw. Something flickered between them, quick as a snake in the grass, too fast to name. Clara May dropped her gaze, her heart thudding a little too hard, a little too loud. She told herself it was nothing. A trick of the heat. A glance from a man passing through who would be gone before sunset. Still, she watched him tether his horse outside the saloon, his movements patient, steady, like he had all the time in the world and none of it was wasted. Inside the store, Miss Cartwright, the owner's wife, leaned over the counter, peering through the dusty window. "New face," she muttered, her voice pinched and suspicious. "No good ever comes of strangers here." Clara May said nothing, just bent her head and kept sweeping. But her ears strained for any scraps of conversation that drifted through the cracked windows. Later that day, when her chores were done and the sun had dipped low, Clara May walked the long way home, past the church, past the old graveyard, where her mother's name was carved into splintered stone, past the broken oak at the edge of town, where the ground seemed to drink the light whole. She didn't expect to see him again, but there he was, leaning against the rail by the church steps, smoking a thin cigarette, one boot crossed over the other like he'd been waiting there all along. He tipped his hat when she passed, just a small, polite gesture, nothing more. Still, it nearly buckled, her knees. She stopped, unsure, the broom handle still clutched in her fingers like a shield. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The breeze kicked up, tugging loose strands of her hair across her face. She pushed them back awkwardly, painfully aware of the way her limp made her shift unevenly from one foot to the other. "You're Clara May," he said finally, his voice low and rough, like gravel stirred by rain. She nodded, wary. "Name's Luke," he added, glancing up at the reddening sky. Luke Calder. Silence stretched out again between them, but it wasn't empty. It was thick, almost warm. "You got folks here?" she asked, her voice so soft she wasn't sure he'd even catch it. He shook his head once. "No, ma'am. Just passing through." Another lie. She could smell it. Not cruel, not sharp, but a lie all the same. Men didn't come to Dry Creek to pass through. They came to leave something behind, or bury it. "Well," she said, not knowing what else to offer. "Safe travels." She turned to go, her heart thudding like a drum against her ribs. She didn't want him to see it, the way hope curled inside her like smoke, sharp and choking. But before she limped 2 steps away, he said, "You ain't what they say." She froze. Slowly, she turned back to him. His face was still shadowed, unreadable, but his voice was sure. "You hear enough whispers," he said, flicking his cigarette into the dust. "You start to think that's all a person is, but I don't reckon that's true." Clara May didn't know what to say to that. Nobody had ever spoken to her like that, like maybe she was made of something worth salvaging. Instead of answering, she just gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She clutched her broom tighter and walked away before he could see the tears burning in her eyes. The next few days stirred the dust of Dry Creek in ways Clara May had never seen. Luke Calder didn't spend his time drunk in the saloon like most men. He stayed quiet, worked odd jobs fixing fences, shoeing horses, patching roofs. He didn't ask for much, didn't poke his nose into other people's business, but he watched, and not with the greedy eyes of men who thought they were owed something. He watched like he was learning the rhythm of a place already breaking itself apart. It wasn't long before the whispers started. "Drifter," spat Mr. Higgins, the storekeeper. "Troublemaker," muttered the pastor's wife, clutching her Bible a little tighter. "Mark my words," said Miss Cartwright. "He's looking for something, and it ain't good." Even her father noticed. "Best stay away from him." He slurred one night, a sour stink of whiskey curling off him. "A man who don't drink or whore, he ain't right. He's hiding something." Clara May said nothing. She knew all too well that sometimes the best parts of a person were the ones they had to hide, to survive. One evening, as the sun bled red over the hills, she found Luke again, or maybe he found her. She was fixing the hinge on the church gate, the limp in her leg making the work slow and clumsy. Without a word, he knelt beside her and took the hammer from her hand. For a long while, they worked in silence, passing nails back and forth. His fingers brushing hers just once, a light accidental thing that made her heart trip. When the gate finally swung true again, he stood, brushed the dust from his hands, and said, "Folks here ever see you, Clara May? Really see you?" The question hit her harder than a slap. She wanted to laugh, or cry, or scream. Instead, she said, "Ain't no one here who cares what's real, only what's easy to believe." He nodded like he understood something deeper than her words. "I see you," he said simply. The air between them crackled, heavy with all the things they couldn't yet say. Somewhere behind them, a door creaked open. A sharp voice rang out, Miss Cartwright again, suspicion dripping from every syllable. "You. Best be careful, Clara May. Good girls don't linger in the dark with men they barely know." Clara May flinched like she'd been struck. Luke, however, didn't so much as blink. He tipped his hat to the scowling woman and said, "Easy as breathing. Sometimes it's the ones you know who hurt you worst." Miss Cartwright huffed and slammed the door. Clara May stood there, heart pounding, a strange, fierce hope flickering inside her. She wasn't foolish enough to believe in fairy tales. Dry Creek didn't make room for miracles, but maybe, just maybe, it made room for a shift in the wind. And maybe Luke Calder wasn't just passing through after all. It happened on a Sunday. The sun was barely rising, the town still drowsy and sullen from a night of cheap whiskey and cheaper talk, when Clara May's world shattered for good. It started with a whisper, a cruel, cutting rumor that spread like wildfire. Someone said they'd seen her with Luke. Calder behind the church said she was no better than the saloon girls who prowled the streets after dark. The story twisted itself ugly before it even hit the breakfast tables. By the time Clara May stepped into the church that morning, head bowed, hands knotted together, she could feel the stares slicing into her. Miss Cartwright turned her back, pointedly. The pastor's wife sniffed loud enough to rattle the pews. Men who'd once ignored her now leered openly, seeing not a girl but a thing cheapened, broken, used. She made it 3 steps before the whispering became words. Shameless. Shoulda known. Like mother, like daughter. Clara May froze in the aisle, the hymn book slipping from her fingers and landing with a hollow thud against the wood. Someone, she never saw who, stuck out a foot. Her bad leg crumpled first. She hit the ground hard, her palms scraping raw against the rough boards. Gasps and laughter echoed around her like gunfire. The pastor coughed awkwardly, pretending not to notice. Not one person reached for her. Not one. Clara May pushed herself, up with shaking arms, shame burning hotter than any sun, and stumbled out the church door into the open, cruel light of day. She ran, as best she could with her limp and the tears blinding her. She ran. Through the dusty streets, past the saloon where drunk men jeered, past the schoolhouse where children pressed their faces to the glass to watch her flee, past everything she had ever known. The dry riverbed rose up to meet her. Her foot snagged, on a stone, and she went down again, hard. The breath punched out of her. Dust filled her mouth, her nose, her eyes. She curled in on herself, arms wrapped tight around her ribs, willing herself to disappear. She didn't know how long she lay. There, long enough for the sun to claw higher in the sky, long enough for her throat to dry to dust and her hands to tremble from exhaustion, long enough to believe she really was as worthless as they said. "If this is all I am," she whispered to the empty sky, "then let the earth take me." No one came. No one but him. They thought she was broken, but someone saw gold in the ashes. Subscribe. I promise you, tomorrow's story will prove love still lives out here. Bootsteps crunched in the dirt nearby, slow, careful, deliberate. Clara May squeezed her eyes shut tighter. She didn't want him to see her like this. Broken. Beaten. Done. But Luke Calder didn't say a word. He didn't lecture her. He didn't pity her. He didn't scold her for causing trouble. He just sat down in the dirt beside her, not touching, not crowding. Just there. The sun beat down mercilessly. The riverbed was bone dry, cracked and splintered. In that wasteland of dust and shame, his silence was the only kindness she had left. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. Clara May lost track. The trembling in her hands slowly faded, replaced by a heavy, aching exhaustion. Finally, Luke spoke, his voice low and steady. You didn't do anything wrong. Simple words, no grand speeches, no promises he couldn't keep. But they cracked something inside her harder than any fall ever could. She turned her head slightly, squinting up at him. His face was serious, shadowed beneath the brim of his hat, but his eyes, those quiet, steady eyes, were filled with something she hadn't seen in anyone in Dry Creek in years. Respect. He wasn't here to carry her away from the pain. He was here to sit in it with her. "I'm tired," she rasped, the confession spilling out before she could stop it. "I'm so damn tired, Luke." He nodded like he understood, like maybe he knew that kind of tired too. "You don't have to stand up, yet," he said. "Ain't no shame in laying low when the world's trying to break your back." Tears welled again, but this time, they weren't the hot, bitter kind. They were cool and slow, like rain after a long drought. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you even here?" Luke shrugged one shoulder. "You remind me of someone." "Who?" "Myself," he said simply. They sat there until the sun began to slip behind the hills, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. The town behind them buzzed and hissed like an angry hive, but out here, by the broken bones of the river, there was peace. Finally, when her limbs were too stiff to stay curled up anymore, Clara May shifted. Luke rose to his feet first, then extended a hand, not grabbing, not pulling, just offering. It took every ounce of battered courage she had left, but she placed her hand in his. He helped her up gently, careful of her limp. When she stumbled, he didn't catch her like a hero in a storybook. He just steadied her elbow, letting her find her own feet again. She leaned on him for just a moment, just long enough to borrow a little of his strength, then straightened on her own. "Thank you," she said hoarsely. He tipped his hat in a silent acknowledgement, then walked beside her, slow and easy, matching his steps to hers as they made their way back toward town. Not a rescue, not a miracle. Just a man who saw something worth standing beside. And for the first time in a long, long while, Clara May wondered if maybe, just maybe, she was more than the hurt she carried. Maybe she was something whole, something still shining beneath all the dust and ruin. The fire wasn't in the sky or the brush or the old timber buildings of Dry Creek. It was in her blood. It took days before Clara May could walk the streets without feeling every eye like a hot brand on her skin. Even longer before the whispers lost their bite. But with Luke Calder by her side, a curious thing happened. She stopped caring. They didn't try to win the town back. It was never hers to begin with. They started building something of their own. It was Luke's idea first. The patch of land on the far edge of Dry Creek, past the abandoned rail tracks and the sun-bleached bones of old cattle pens. "We could clear it out," he said one evening, kicking at the dry weeds. "Build something." New. Clara May looked around skeptically. The land was rough, the soil stubborn. Only the hardiest things survived out here. She smiled. She understood stubborn. Day after day they worked, hauling wood from the forested ridges, patching together a crude shelter, hammering and sawing, under the burning sun. Luke taught her to mend fences, to ride with a lighter touch, to read the moods of skittish horses the way he read the weather. Clara May taught him how to patch fabric with invisible stitches, how to catch rainwater in old tin pans, how to listen to the earth when it warned of storms. It wasn't much. A few rough posts, a half-finished roof, 2 rescued horses who trusted no one but them, but it was theirs. And for the first time since her mother's grave dried in the sun, Clara May felt something take root inside her that wasn't fear. It was small, frail, but it was hope. One night after a long day of fixing the sagging corral fence, Luke built a fire in the old iron ring they had dragged from town. The flames caught slowly, sputtering against the dry air before flaring to life. They sat side by side on an old blanket, the sky wide and black above them, the stars scattered like salt. Luke handed her a battered tin cup of coffee, his fingers brushing hers, lingering just a heartbeat longer than necessary. Clara May sipped the coffee, grimacing at the bitterness but grateful for the warmth. She tucked her knees up to her chest and stared into the fire. "You ever think," she said slowly, "that maybe some of us were born wrong?" Luke didn't answer right away. He tossed a twig into the fire, watching it curl and blacken. "No," he said, finally. "I think some of us were born in the wrong places, that's all." Clara May let the words settle deep in her bones. Wrong places, not wrong people. She blinked hard against the sudden sting in her eyes. "I'm scared," she confessed, voice. "Well, scared this'll all get taken away. Scared it'll never be enough." Luke shifted closer, their shoulders almost touching. "Good," he said quietly. "Means it matters." She looked at him then. Really looked. The hard lines of his jaw, the deep scars on his knuckles, the way he carried himself like a man used to, losing things he loved. There was more to Luke Calder than dust and silence. There were stories he hadn't told her yet, wounds he hadn't let heal. And somewhere in the growing shadows behind them, there were dangers that hadn't shown their teeth. Yet, tension peak break. "You've come this far with her. You felt that, didn't you? Subscribe. I want you to meet someone else tomorrow. Someone just as forgotten. Continue." The trouble came the next morning. A stranger rode into Dry Creek, a heavy-set man with a gray mustache and cold eyes. His badge gleamed in the sunlight, catching every gaze. Sheriff Bartlett. Not the town sheriff. No, Dry Creek was too small, too forgotten to have its own law. Bartlett rode circuit, bringing law and judgment in equal measure to every broken town on his map. Clara May watched from the shadows as he tied his horse outside the saloon and barked orders at the men who dared get in his way. But it was when he asked about Luke Calder that her blood ran cold. "Looking for a drifter," he said. Name of Calder. Escaped from Ridge Hollow Prison 2 winters back. Horse thief. Killer. The words dropped like stones in a still pond. Every head turned toward the edge of town, where Clara May and Luke had been quietly carving out a life. Every whisper sharpened into a weapon. Heart hammering in her chest, Clara May ran. She found Luke at the corral, brushing down the skittish mare they'd rescued. The second he saw her face, he knew. He set down the brush and met her eyes with a calmness that made her knees weak. "You knew they'd come," she said, her voice trembling. Luke nodded once. "Eventually." "Is it true?" she asked, hating the break in her voice. He didn't lie. He didn't pretend. "I done things I'm not proud of," he said. "Things I had to do to stay alive." "Did you kill?" she whispered. He looked her dead in the eye. "Only when I had no other choice." The old fear, the one she thought she'd buried, clawed up her throat. Trust was a fragile thing, and right now it felt like a thread stretched too tight. "You have to run," she said urgently. "You can't fight them. Not here." Luke shook his head. "Not running anymore, Clara May. Tired of running my whole damn life." She grabbed his hand, desperate. "Please, if they take you, if they hang you, I can't." He squeezed her fingers gently. "If I run, I leave behind the only good thing I ever found." Tears blurred her vision. "You'll die. Maybe," he said. "But if I die, I'll die standing for something that matters." A sob tore from her chest, ragged and ugly. But she understood. Because all her life, she'd been surviving. Maybe it was time to start living instead. Together, they packed what little they had: food, water, the old hunting rifle she kept hidden under the floorboards. They saddled the mare and the old roan gelding. No fancy plans. No grand escape, just two people too stubborn to quit. When Sheriff Bartlett and his men rode out to the edge of town, they found the small cabin empty, the corral abandoned. But if they'd looked closer, they might have seen something left behind, something stronger than fear. A fire still burning in the iron ring, still alive. They didn't run far, just far enough to find a place the world hadn't already broken. 2 valleys over, past the jagged ridge the locals called Widow's Teeth, they found a stretch of land with black soil and a slow-singing creek. Wild horses roamed free here, and the sky stretched so wide it hurt to look at. It wasn't much. It was everything. Luke and Clara May spent the first weeks living rough, under the stars, under the mercy of the weather, building their lives, from scraps and stubbornness. At night they lay side by the fire, their hands almost touching, speaking in low murmurs about things they had never dared dream before. A house, a herd, a place where nobody whispered your name like it was. A curse. Word drifted slow but steady from Dry Creek. Some said the sheriff left empty-handed. Some said he promised to return. Most folks just went back to forgetting them, the way the world forgot the things it was ashamed of. But Clara May didn't care. She wasn't running anymore, and neither was Luke. When the spring thaw came, turning the creek wild and the hills green, they decided, no preacher, no fancy dresses, no witnesses but the trees and the sky and the stubborn little mare who refused to stand still. Luke carved a ring from twisted silver wire he scavenged from an old saddle. Clara May wove a crown of prairie flowers, wild and lopsided. Under the bruised purple sky with the first stars winking awake overhead, he took her hand. "You sure?" he asked, voice rough as worn leather. She smiled, not the timid, frightened smile she used to wear like armor, but a real one, fierce and shining. "I'm sure," she said. So he slid the ring onto her finger, and she kissed him like a woman who knew the weight of loss and chose love anyway. There were no cheers, no applause, just the wind threading through the grass, carrying their vows into the world like seeds on the breeze. And maybe that was better. Maybe the whole world was their witness after all. They built the house together. 2 rooms, a wide porch, a wood stove that Luke cursed and Clara May coaxed into life. They built a herd from horses nobody else wanted, the scarred, the skittish, the ones too wild or broken to be tamed. Clara May whispered to them like old friends, patient and steady, until they trusted her with their fears. In time, they trusted themselves too. The people from the nearest town, Hollow Bend, were different than Dry Creek. Harder, maybe, but less cruel. They didn't ask about scars or limps or pasts. They cared if you could work, if you paid your debts, if you minded your fences. So they built a life, plank by stubborn plank. The final test came one crisp fall morning, 2 years after. They left Dry Creek behind. A rider kicked up dust on the far ridge. Clara May spotted him first, the glint of a badge catching the sun. Sheriff Bartlett. He rode alone this time, older, heavier in the saddle. Luke went to meet him at the edge of the property, rifle slung loose over his back but his hands easy. Clara. May stood on the porch, heart pounding, ready to fight beside him if she had to. Bartlett pulled up his horse, looked down at Luke, and said only this: "Dry Creek's not looking for you anymore." A long pause. Just the creak of saddle leather and the wind sighing low through the grass. "Maybe you weren't the villain after all," the sheriff added grudgingly. Luke said nothing. Bartlett turned his horse with a grunt and rode off without another word. Luke stood there a long moment, watching him disappear. Then he turned and looked straight at her, not with fear, not with regret, but with a quiet, unshakable choice. He walked back to her, slow and sure, until he was standing at the base of the porch steps. Clara May met him there. She didn't ask, "What now?" She didn't ask, "Are you sure?" She already knew. This was their life now, not borrowed, not stolen, theirs. He reached up, fingers brushing hers where they clutched the porch rail. "I choose you," Luke said simply. Her throat tightened so fiercely she couldn't speak. She just nodded, once hard, and squeezed his hand. Later, after the sun dipped behind the hills and the first frost kissed the grass silver, they sat. Together on the porch, a worn quilt wrapped around their shoulders. Clara May leaned her head against his chest, feeling the steady drum of his heart. Luke traced circles against the back of her hand, slow and sure. "We ought to name the first colt," he murmured. She smiled sleepily. "What'll we call him?" Luke thought for a long moment. "Hope," he said. She smiled wider. Hope, born from dust and scars and second chances, born from the fire that refused to die, born from two broken souls who built something unbreakable together. And when Clara May closed her eyes that night, the stars spilling like silver across the sky, she knew one true thing. She was never a curse. She was someone's miracle all along. Subscribe. And let me introduce you to the next miracle tomorrow.